Without further ado, I would like to welcome Ms. Sairee Chahal on the show. Thank you so much, Sairee, for joining me. It's such a pleasure to host you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Glad to hear that. Sari, today I'm very excited for the episode because of two things, because of how your career has panned out and how the problem at hand that you're solving for is extremely existential. So I was reading up a couple of numbers and the state, while it's improving for sure, the women inclusivity in the ecosystem is really bad. So instead of beginning the episode in a traditional manner, I'd love if you could head on address the problem at hand, the problem that you've been solving for quite some time, and what have your observations been 8 years into what you're trying to do? So if you could talk about the gap in the ecosystem or in the general workspace that women have faced and what you're trying to build as the solution for the problem, it'd be very interesting to hear for the audience and will be very insightful.
Right. All right. So, I think, look, the problem at hand is actually a very large problem statement. Gender gap is a huge sort of problem. I mean, I think it's one of the UN SDGs, so it's not a tiny problem. But I think if we were to narrow this down, let's bring this to India. Let's bring this to women in India, and particularly women who are maybe so we're not really solving yet for rural farmers. We're not solving for people who don't have that kind of access, but we're still solving for what I call middle India, right? Women, and especially that middle India has grown since since we first started. But women, uh, even in the most privileged sections of the society, right? So if we were to do small Venn diagrams, so startup founders would be a really tiny circle, women educated would be a bigger circle, then women in tech would be another middle-ish circle, and then women at large, women who have, let's say, who were born, let's say, between 1960 and now, right? Like, let's say, 10 years from now, from here. So I think, if you just took that subset of population and you said what is their status in society, obviously if you look at women at large, obviously, and you pan it over a century, there are a lot of things that have changed, right from voting rights to being able to marry independently, being able to apply for jobs. So clearly it's a it's a we're looking at a very large canvas. But let's bring this down to women who are sort of educated, let's say at least women who are literate, who can read, write, use a mobile phone, or can use a WhatsApp, let's sort of even simplify it further, and want more out of life, right? So clearly that's really the sort of segment we look at. But also, I think, everything a lot of these problems are not direct problems to solve. Some of these large problems, let's say sustainability, climate change, uh, healthcare, financial inclusion, gender gap. These are very multidisciplinary problems, because a lot of things are connected to others.
Right.
Gender gap is connected to society, to education, to healthcare, to laws, to a whole lot of that. But the way we look at it is our filter is very, very simple. We assume that technology can be a huge enabler. It is an enabler in our lives, right from Tinder to Uber to everything else that we use. We are a generation that lives off technology. So we're just applying that filter to gender gap, and in a very, very segregated manner, to say we will only use internet as a means of enablement, and we'll use internet as a means of creating an ecosystem. And the other thesis I've always had is when ecosystems get created, things change at a much faster pace. Silicon Valley is a classic example. Now, hopefully, that'll happen in Miami all over again. But ecosystems change things, right? It happened with, for example, the Indian ecosystem of IIT and engineering, being incubated in early 60s, right? Or obviously the Indian startup ecosystem, or Bay Area ecosystem, or the ecosystem around grassroots and communities that India has had, right? So
Right.
these are really classic examples. What we're trying to do is also look at Sheroes as an ecosystem plan. So I've never looked at
Right.
Sheroes as a company doing one product and one thing, because uh, I believe, when you're building in a market that's not fully developed, you have to do a range of things. It's like what Alibaba had to do. They had to
Right.
solve for every part of the chain, right? They had to build payment, then they had to build marketplace, then they had to build logistics, they had to build like everything. Obviously, in our case, there is a different lens, different context, but that's how we look at Shiros. And so the problem is really, how can internet be, uh, a big deal in women's life, and what can it do for them? So, and that's how this whole ecosystem has emerged. There is, so if you fundamentally define everything we do in one line. So I think that would really translate to, we are in the building of uh, uh, helping women uh, build their sense of self emotionally and financially. That's all. Like, I think this is, the sense of self is really like the core here, and it means while it's an ecosystem, it benefits every individual at their level and meets them where they are. And then of course we've created what I call the Shiros stack, which is basically an aggregation of all this properties that we have, the Shiros platform, the others that we have, and our
Right.
entire data set. And then we have created levers, right? These are also revenue lines, but these are also levers for growth, because they plow back, that they plow back into the ecosystem. So either it's employment, or it's entrepreneurship, or it's capital, or it's enablement. So these four things happen as we build either our business lines or our ecosystem. So all of this can be put on a small lean canvas and sort of
Right.
but obviously when I first started, none of this was, it didn't look like this, right? Because
Right.
it's like a lab project. You do a lot of frugal, quick and dirty experiments, and then you keep the ones that work and you throw the ones out that don't work.
Got it, got it. But it's really great to see the scope of the work that you're doing and solving for a comprehensive, as you said, laying down an ecosystem per se. And I hope it goes to the right direction. But stemming from that itself, Sairee, I would like to dive deeper into the problem in the startup ecosystem. Right? I was looking up a couple of numbers, and since Shido's rebranded Jan 18, if I'm not wrong, there has been this, like, not to point out that timeline, but in the last 2 years, only 1.57 women-led startups have been funded, and where the co-founder is a male, it's the number goes up to 5.97. But to have a 94% number of just male-led startups get funded is dismal, to say the least. So maybe for all the women aspiring founders listening, from somebody who's been in the ecosystem for the better part of the last 2 decades, what are some of your cues as to how these problems can be solved for, and what's the problem in the startup ecosystem per se, if you were to look at it?
Well, I think the startup ecosystem is equally reflective of the society we live in, right?
Right.
I do believe that, like, we're a country that loves stereotypes, right? I mean, we're a country that still has a caste system, so we can't do away, we can't close our eyes to those facts. We are also still the country that has the dowry system, that has marrying within your community's ecosystem. Women's safety is still a big deal, right? So I think if you ask most women, what is most universal to a woman who lives in a small slum and a woman who lives in a big condo, we all are still always watching out for our safety.
Right.
That need never, it doesn't go away because it's constructed like that. And I think when you bring this down to the startup ecosystem, like, I internally joke that if you have a vagina, you're not going to get funded. So clearly it's goddamn hard to begin
Right.
with, and the ecosystem wants more of the same, like whatever works. So when food delivery was working, it is food delivery. When it is payment apps, it's payment apps. So there is a wave, and the truth is, if you want diversity in the ecosystem, you also have to be open to diverse ideas. You can't expect women founders and come and build exactly what has been happening in the ecosystem, the
Right.
same kind of companies, the same kind of products. And I think that's the and until such time, people right from LPs to GPs to sovereign funds to investors to angels, they continue to be men as well. So they
Right.
continue to fund the same. It's a safer model. Look, the truth is, while venture is supposed to back risks, it actually backs safety in most cases. I mean, the risk takers obviously outliers like A16 and Sequoia, and because they can go out and break the norm, also because they have more leverage to do it. But
Right.
everybody else is just a follower. Everybody else is a follower, and they follow what looks like the safest bet, and what is more familiar. Even if, and the truth is, venture as a class is still not, is doing the returns that it possibly can.
Yeah.
Most VC funds don't even return the capital they raise. So
Right.
so if you just look at some of those numbers, I think it's just a comfort of being in a familiar environment, doing more of the same, the old boys club. But also I think not making that extra effort. Look, if you are going to fund a few women founders who are going to build unicorns, which means your top of the funnel needs to be large. And even if you averagely look at the amount of money women raise, it's pitiful small. People expect women to do a lot more with the same capital than they expect a guy founder to do. Or the failure rates of women, right? Like, women are just not allowed to fail. How can you expect more women in the ecosystem if women are not allowed to fail? And how harshly we are judged for every failure. So I believe that these are norms that need to be broken. Like, a lot of people come and ask me, what should we do? A lot of venture funds, or a lot
Right.
of GPs. But the truth is, if you want the ecosystem to grow, you have to make this an equal playing field for all men founders and women founders, and also have more women writing checks. If there are not enough women investing, and how will they invest if they haven't been enough exits, right? So it is a hard problem to solve. But uh, funds can still do a lot more uh, at their level. So, for example, meet every woman founder who writes into you, because it's already taken her a lot to get there, right?
Right.
Even if they don't have fundable ideas. And of course, I think be more cognizant of the fact that if we don't uh, capitalize women founders enough, they're not going to build the companies we want them to do, right?
Right.
So, and I think I've seen this while building Sheroes, right? It's expected that your money is going to run for a long time. Your runway is obviously on pennies, while everybody's on dollars. So I think it's a very, very different world.
Right.
And clearly there are standards. There is no doubting that.
Right. Got it. So there is a cycle which is going on and which has to break free from, and I hope like everybody who's listening can take cues from it and work towards it. Lovely to hear that, and I hope really that with the amazing work you're doing, one day, maybe 5 years later, it'll be a different reality that we're in. But stemming from there, I mentioned briefly that you've had a great career for the better part of the last 2 decades. You've been an entrepreneur, you've worn different hats, you're on board of companies, and you've done so many things across the years. And in one of your interviews, I realized you saying that you set out to actually become a professor. So it's lovely to, if you can probably give our audience a quick cue of this marvelous journey that you've had across the last couple of years, as to how the entrepreneurial bug hit you, and what was the start like, maybe.
Right. Actually, the start was pretty academic, like you said. It's look, I we didn't know all these options existed, right? I mean, this whole thing around startups and uh, products and funding. These are very new things on the block. India is still very traditional. We still want our sons and daughters to be engineers, doctors, CAs, maybe architects at
Right.
best. So obviously the India I grew up in was really a lot like that. And I always thought, and I went to JNU, which is obviously not the best startup hub in the country. So, but I I think two things happened. One, of course, I stumbled upon what became the ecosystem later.
Right.
So right when the first India internet word was happening, or when I think maybe I think Rediff was a real startup at that point in time. There was a .com boom, and that was the time I ended up building my first startup.
Right.
So again, not planned, but I stumbled upon, and it kind of became a thing. Uh, Again, beginner's luck. It did well. Oh, it got acquired. So I guess there were some triggers that supported my early career, and encouraged me to stay in the space. And I think temperament wise, I've always been a founder. I think that is the best thing. There is a product market fit, but there's also a founder market fit. And
Right.
I think I was not cut out for a corporate career, and I'm so glad that I didn't go into one. I would have been quite not great there. So I think that kind of transpired. And I think over a period of time, obviously, the ecosystem has changed. I think the real sort of surge in this ecosystem happened once Flipkart,
Right.
started growing. 2014, 2013, there were those are exciting years. Paytm grew, and of course there was, a bunch of other companies that found their, feet around that time. So Uber, Ola happened, food tech happened, payments happened. So
Right.
obviously every 18 months there is a new trend on the block.
Right.
Obviously there has been, the funding roller coaster. It's up and down, but it's a train that is on rails, right? So it's not going to go away anytime.
Right.
So I think those are some of the things. And of course, uh, one of the early learnings of my career is that as India gets more internet access, it can really be game changing. And so Shiro is really an experiment built on that idea. It's a company
Sure.
built with the core is that women plus internet plus the idea of building communities is quite powerful, and we should do more of the same. And that's exactly what we're doing now. And obviously now Shiro's has grown. It's 22 million women. It's it is an ecosystem in itself. So one of the things that internet hasn't discovered is, so we all have discovered the idea of traffic and audience and engagement, but we haven't discovered the idea of trust. So internet still doesn't know how to measure trust.
Right.
Internet still doesn't know how to measure depth, and how to measure impact. And those are all things we are really good at as a company. So as a company, millions and millions of women have benefited in a very direct sort of a way. Either they have found a community that supports them, or they've used, one of the helplines that we run, or they have found work, or they've found their road into entrepreneurship, or they have found what I call a digital presence. So I think these are big items, especially in early stage of an ecosystem. you know
Right.
and since women are really the largest and the latest demographic to come online last 3-4 years, this is less than 5 years old, this whole story,
Right.
post June really. So I think in some ways we're still very early into this phenomena. And I do believe that this will have a huge impact in terms of, one, income generation opportunities for women. And as women's economic contribution goes up, I think, and digital can enable more of that, we will see a big surge in how the story changes. It's one of those most underrated stories in the Indian economy right now. So women's economic contribution is core hook. And of course, I think just building an ecosystem that supports them. So I think all this has transpired last, obviously Shiro's is 5-6 years into the making, the whole company and everything. And of course, my own career has been built on the rails of Indian internet. So I call ourselves children of India internet. There's Vijay Shekhar, there's Sachin, there's Masab, there's of course Deep and Sanjeev and Bhavesh. So I think we're folks who've been kind of around, right, and have seen
Right.
have seen literally change, maybe already like half a dozen times.
Got it, got it. But great to see this comprehensive, space that you spoke about and the power of technology. And it's wonderful, I was looking up a 8-year-old TED talk of yours, and you mentioned very clearly, and it's great how you envisioned what the future is going to be like, if I can put it that way, because you speak with such conviction about technology, about remote work, which are some of the things that you were executing. So moving from there itself, I want to talk a bit about FlexiMoms in terms of the entrepreneurial scenario, right? So there's this common phrase in starting up that we hear where we talk about ship broken things, right? And from what I could gather of FlexiMoms, in terms of how you created a landing page, and it was a very very nascent stage product that you'd launched, right? So if you could probably talk a bit about how FlexiMom started out and what was the roadmap like for it, and being able to, if not pivot, just go with the flow and observe consumer behavior, keep iterating, and that cycle of your journey. If any cues for the audience, and how aspiring founders can probably take cues from that side of your journey.
Right. So look, I think if you're going to plant a seed, then you have to constantly make sure it has space to grow. So obviously, when the first idea of FlexMoms went up, there was none of this conversation. Like remote work didn't exist in India.
Right.
Women's internet was not like it's still not a famous hashtag, right? But I think I'm the only one who uses it. But I do believe it's a real thing, right? So or the idea that hey, we can do a lot more with internet for women. I think these were theoretical assumptions. These were just things in the thin air.
Right.
So FlexiMoms was perhaps the only time that somebody thought of productizing this whole idea for women and their careers, right? Like I think we were the first ones. We were the first ones to put out real corporate jobs which are remote and flexible. And then I think you have to also follow the market. You have to follow the user. And that's exactly what we have done. When FlexiMoms was founded, none of this existed, and obviously the space grew over the next couple of years. But what also transpired was the market expanded. Look, two things have happened. The Indian job market hasn't grown in almost a decade now. Really, we have, after, I think post IT services, we really haven't seen job growth that this country needs. And obviously, women are not enough numbers in workforce already, and there's no job growth. It's going to hit them hard.
Right.
So we were cognizant of the fact of where market is going, and we kept that in mind. But also that market is expanding. Market is not just the 20,000 corporate companies we serve, or 500,000 women we serve, but also 100 million women outside of that, and another 100 million outside of that uh, range. So you have to go after that, and I think you can't plant yourself. I mean, look at any company, right? I mean, just imagine the first version of Paytm, or the first version of Flipkart, or the
Right.
first version of Uber, right? Companies that are building ecosystems will constantly, they shouldn't look like their older version at all, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, that's, I think, a success check as well. It's also a reference check to say whether you're evolving with the user, with the market, for sure. And then of course Sheroes was initially just a jobs and careers platform, but it was built as a community. So the idea of community was seeded, and I think uh, back then nobody was talking about communities, I think. And now it's all, like all of 2020, I heard community so many times, it's coming from my ears,
Right.
24/7. But the truth is, so we seeded the first community, and then we expanded it to vernacular and tier two, and to do a lot more than what we had initially set out, because that's what the user wanted. So I think
Right.
the only compass we have, the only sort of radar we have, is the user, their behaviors, and of course the market. So you have to constantly follow a market in an emerging space, and that's exactly what we ended up doing. And of course, I think uh, even where we are today, we totally know that this will evolve like 5x more, in and faster now, because the
Right.
pace of change is faster, the user is adapting more, the ecosystem is more built out. So we're definitely seeing that happen.
Got it, got it. And yeah, you speak about community interests, and I'm probably going to take a deep dive into it later. But lovely to hear that you have to be okay with, and you have to constantly strive to evolve to become the better version of what you were yesterday. So that's a great cue out there. But stemming from there itself, one another thing that I noticed through your journey is that from the consulting startup, it came to FlexiMoms. From FlexiMoms, it was Sheroes. From Sheroes, you had a couple of other versions that had to launch, right? So you've spoken about launch and relaunches multiple times. You've done summits across the years, and there have been multiple such things that you've done where you've constantly launched new products. So what I'm trying to eye at here for young founders who are maybe array of vary of how to go about launches, or want very fancy launches, or very stubborn about a couple of things, or at the very fundamental level, what have your cues been about these launches or these pivots? Like, I know that pivots are now normalized into the system, and there are famous stories of how companies have pivoted. Like, Slack was basically a pivot. So but what according to you are some of the cues in terms of pivots and launches, if you may?
Right. So I think it depends a lot on the space you play in, right?
Okay.
So
Right.
obviously,
For
SaaS
sure.
pivot is a different pivot, because
Right.
you're only up on sales and you have customers on the other end of the line. The easiest pivots actually are in consumer, uh, and especially in an ecosystem. So a lot of things that we built out were not, I think the only product we killed was our job product,
Right.
because we figured it was a fundamental shift, it was a directional shift, and it was very conscious, and obviously it was a hard shift. But if it didn't do that, we wouldn't have directional clarity for us as a
Right.
company. So that was, I think, the only time. But I think the good thing about today's uh, world is, one, building is far easier than it was before, right? Like you can do overnight launches, right? And
Hmm.
launches are what? Launches are landing pages on social media, and some people talking about it. Like, to be honest, launches have become damn simple, right?
Right.
And you
Now.
can, you can do this for different products and stuff like it's and especially with this whole build in public culture, you can actually make your community a part of your story. You can learn from them. You can do quick and dirty experiments. In fact, uh, today where we are, the whole Sheroes architecture is built in such a way that uh, anybody, including interns and very very early product managers, can build whatever they want on the platform, just to test their hypothesis. So we are set up for that because I say we're talking about women's internet here. We can build maybe two use cases, three use cases. We can build this whole platform. We can build a framework, but there are still thousands of things that are super underexplored, right?
True,
So,
true.
and there are many ways to build this out. One could start a VC fund to do this. One could sort of set up an accelerator to do this. One could work with hackers and developer communities to do this. One could build APIs and microservices to do this. But there are still a lot of things that can be done on the same rails, right?
Right.
So if you build ecosystems, then one, experimentation has to be frugal and it has to be quick and dirty. It has to be overnight launches, really. So that's exactly what we've done. So while we've done a bunch of things, but none of this really came from a place of high resources and and the whole lab culture. I think the company has a lab culture. Anybody who has an idea, so people who are community managers have dabbled in product managers have gone and sold products, have gone into business, and the whole hog. So as a company, I think that is really important, how you build your company, who you hire. If you hire people who come in on paper written JDs with designations and things, this is my scope of work and this is my desk and this is what I will do and go home, then you're not going to build the company that experiments. To
Right.
build a company that experiments, you have to literally build a tribe. Uh, you have to build a lot of directional clarity, but you have to also build a lot of room to play. And room to play only happens when you're okay with people falling down with Bruce Lee's and failed products, right? And I think it's harder to do this than to say this. It's very easy, but companies are very 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 intolerant of failures, especially things that didn't take off. But the truth is, if you don't allow for that, you're not going to sort of at least expand your range. You're not going to build depth, or you're not going to build breadth. Yes, and I think a lot of companies face this because they become single product successes, and then when you need to, the innovator's dilemma, right? You've been great at one product, but how do you go to the next one,
Mhm.
and how do you and the pressure of one successful product is a lot, and I think and I think that sets it. And for us, I think we've always said we believe in ecosystem. We always put our users first. We put our mission first. We also put longevity before everything else. So a lot of long term thinking, a lot of doing away with short term successes, even at the cost of revenue sometimes, because these are calls. And I think
Right.
uh, for us, a lot of pivots and launches are really part of literally day to day programming. They're not outside of that. We've literally like made them part of our day to day, really. And that's how a lot of things get built. I can only say this in hindsight again, because uh,
Right.
a lot of things. I'll give you an example. We built a small a social commerce experiment last year. I think around December 2019 was the first time we thought about this, and now we're at a place where it's actually it's going to become a challenger business in the market. But the truth is, it that product failed 5 times, and a two-member team kept at it. They have like 5 launches of the same product.
Right.
Okay, but with every change they learn something. And again, it also is a case of uh, you know uh, uh, at what time do you unleash growth? After you found product market fit,
Right.
or before that? I think a lot of companies assume that throwing a lot of resources will get you to product market fit,
Mhm.
but you know it is a hard problem to solve, and getting to product market fit always takes time. It takes failures and relaunches, and you can go back to any story in the world, right? There is nobody who got to product market fit without, falling down a few times, even if they were, super successful later on. And I think that's how we look at it. Keep at it until you're ready to roll, until you're ready to scale. A remote work business, right? Like 2020 saw that business grow the fastest, but for a long time it was a black sheep business. It didn't have anything to show for it because it didn't have any sex appeal, right?
Right.
And then of course 2020 came and remote work became so mainstream that it became like
Right.
the coolest business in the line, right? So it's also a matter of one, your own conviction, but also how okay are you with your version of success versus other people's version of success, right?
Right.
So in VC terms it was not super successful, but it was very successful for our community because 10,000 women found work,
Right.
right? They found salaried jobs sitting at home for working for large companies like Zomato and Paytm. And to us that was really important, so we kept at it and we said it's going to find its day in the sun, and it did, right? So obviously we didn't know COVID's going to happen, right? But we knew that it's inevitable. So our bet on remote work is 7 years ago, but it found it sort of the tailwind year only in 2020, right? So I think uh, things take time, ecosystems take time, but guess what, all those 10,000 women are going to become 100,000 women. We possibly will be one of the largest employers of women in this country. Not only women will find work via us, they will bring their lives to Sheroes. They have their digital presence on Sheroes. We are starting a line around financial products for women. So we build our own distribution. So it's an ecosystem that talks to each other. So that's the long and short of it. That there is no formula, but it's going to take time. But at least in your head, if your why is clear, your how will work out. And I think as founders, we get clouded because the market and short term and fundraising, it never questions your why. There is no formula for why. And
Right.
and I keep saying, if your why is clear, the how will work out. But you can't come back to a why later. And I think that's the difference between building something that's very very deep and has its own feet versus building something that needs crutches to stand on.
Right, right. That's beautiful to hear, figuring out the why and the emphasis of it, and to see the perseverance across the teams, across your career, and to, keep at it till you accomplish the goal, which is still far off, but to see that perseverance is absolutely spectacular. Stemming from there itself, I want to talk a bit more about some of the things that you've done across Sheroes. So, one of the things that stood out for me are the acquisitions, right? So, I want to just get my head around how you look at synergies and what's your mind frame to actually gather resources from an external source, internalize it, and then use it to expand a given market, a given segment, or a given feature for the consumers.
Right. So actually, like I said, we're building women's internet, and women's internet has many components, right? So there are 4 or 5 big pillars. Uh, Employment, entrepreneurship is a pillar. Financial products is a pillar. Community content support is a pillar. Women's health is a pillar. And of course, the whole Shiro's stack is a core pillar, right? That's a core product. Actually, everything else is built on top of that.
Mhm.
And so the why acquisition? So first of all, the category is super small, right? So if you're going to grow, how do you grow? This is what Mittal
Right,
Steels did, by the way. If you are going to build one of the largest steel empires in the world, you can't build it all by yourself. You have to
right,
go, so acquisitions as a strategy is core to our playbook. It's not something
right,
that just happened. And uh, so who do we acquire and why do we acquire? We acquire because, one, it extends our breadth. It extends our breadth, and
got
sometimes it gives us depth, right?
it,
Two, we acquire because it adds to the framework of what I call women's internet.
right,
Three, mission alignment, right? Hey, culturally, are they similar? Do they understand communities? Do they understand products? Or are they building something that's fundamentally core? Uh, and I think, and for example, this year we acquired, 2020, we acquired Nari.com. I've known the founder, Priya, for as long as I think I've been online, and she's been around. She's a one woman army. She's built a fantastic platform, and now the platform can grow, right? It needs a next level. It has a wonderful home in Shiro's now, because when we make acquisitions, we don't make acquisitions to kill the products. We make
right,
acquisitions to grow that.
Gotcha.
because they, so for example, Sheroes didn't have a publishing play, and we never wanted to be a publisher. But Naughty has 10 years of SEO. I mean, we will never be able to get there on our own, right?
Right.
And Priya is a great founder. She's a group editor now. She's doing the same thing for all our properties, Baby Go and Sheroes and Mars and our commerce piece. So it is wonderful synergy. So I have a framework, and of course, any founder we bring into the family has to do well. Like their position in Sheroes has to be better than their position in their own company, just
Right.
in terms of their, the resources and their own ability to create value and assets for themselves. So that's a playbook, and we've done this many times over. We have acquired Love Doctor became our helpline. uh, you know and we always keep the team. Basically, we find mission alignment, and we keep the team, we keep the product, and we grow it. uh, and therefore, Sheroes is an ecosystem, because you can't build parts of ecosystem all by yourself. And obviously, I think as we go further, we will require maybe less, because we've reached a certain level where we have the pillars, but maybe still, maybe outside of India, right?
Right.
So I think uh, this helps us sort of uh, do a lot of things in a very short frame of time. And I think that's what acquisitions have allowed us to do. And of course, I think in the internet space, uh, whichever way, you need to keep innovation going. And as your companies grow, as founders, we actually become administrators. We do
Right.
basically investor updates, and we do daily sync ups. We have no time to innovate. Then how are you going to innovate, right? We have to constantly bring in people into our companies who are going to bring in cool ideas, who are not inundated by administrative
Yeah.
layers yet. I think as a founder, you have to constantly fight administrative layers,
Right.
because that's where companies begin to decay. It's like stopping. Uh, it's like when you stop exercising. Basically, sort of decay sets in as metabolism goes slow, and all companies go through this. So
True.
for us, acquisitions are a way to, one, keep us fresh, to add to the ecosystem, to bring in smart founders, and of course, increase the strength of the mission.
Right. Yeah. Got it. Got it. That is again a wonderful cue for everybody listening in terms of how you look at acquisitions and the refreshing opinion towards it. And I especially love the last cue where you mentioned, how important independent first principle thinking is for founders, because otherwise the innovation of the company dies in.
I
Further,
think to
sure.
add to the whole acquisition piece, I've seen a lot of acquisitions in India happen or not happen, because we want to extract the most out of that deal. We want to pay
Right.
incoming founders pennies. We want to reduce their chance. We want to reduce their valuation. I think as a founder, the most important framework you should have is the growth framework. If that founder and their asset is not going to grow, then you're basically reducing your own ability to grow.
Got it.
And that, don't bargain for pennies when you're acquiring. Like, I mean, all our acquisitions we made have been actually bigger than us. Like, they were all companies that were bigger than us,
Right.
but it allowed us to expand.
Right.
So obviously, there is a little bit of like permutation, combination, and a little bit of
Right.
like transaction constructing there. But I think it's important to leave value at the table.
True.
And I think most acquisitions fail because we want to juice out the value on day one. I think
Right.
co-creating value is really important
Right.
if you're going to make acquisitions succeed.
Yeah, and part of that, I guess, comes from having like a larger viewpoint instead of having a myopic viewpoint to a deal, than to have, the eye on the larger ball, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Great to hear that. And another thing that really fascinates me about Sheroes is that you work with some great brands across the years, right? Some really marquee companies from the
Yeah.
industry, and some of the angels on board, and you yourself in the industry are such a great name. So having worked with such great people all across and such great brands, what are some of your lessons from those interactions, from those partnerships, from those strategic relations that probably you could spell out for the audience out here?
Right. So actually, you're right. I think as a company, we've been very selective. So to be honest, I think so. We're one of the few companies that's not sales driven. So I know a lot of people think of that as a challenge, but not having sales driven behavior drive the core of your company is great for a long term perspective.
Right.
Which also means you learn more frugality. You learn more you learn to work with the right partners. So I think as Sheroes, we work with some of the best brands. We work with
Right.
Microsoft, Google, Unilever, Tinder, a whole bunch of corporates. And I think what we've learned is as a company, we do not like taking decisions out of fear. The fear of not meeting the next target, the fear of not looking good, the fear of log kya kahenge. And I think as a company we're very mission aligned. So even today we do say unfortunately no to a lot of companies because they quickly want to juice out what they built, or they it's not great for our users, or it's sort of not in line with our mission. So I think it's been a slow bake, but I believe it's set the right precedent. So for example, what it has done for us is, in an age of very push based sales, uh, a lot of our large customer relationships are inbound. you
Oh,
know so
yeah,
I mean, if I may flaunt this a little bit, a Google is an inbound, and a Microsoft is an inbound, and a Unilever is inbound. And I can tell you there are not many companies who can boast of
claim
that,
that.
right?
Yeah, for
So
sure.
we're very, very mission. So people, it's like your vibe attracts your tribe, right? So we're very set up for a certain kind of framework. So which means our partners and customers know who we are and what we can do and what we won't do, right?
Right.
So for example, we built a, clickbaity Dalmau business, and I've stayed clear of that. Like I always say, the internet's learned to measure measure for virality. It's not learned how to measure for trust and depth.
True.
So a lot of customers we work with are actually customers who understand this, and this
Right.
is harder to build because it can't be replicated. You can't buy this off the shelf, right?
Right.
So we just launched the Internet Sati Accelerator in partnership with Google. It's the first rural accelerator. 500 women entrepreneurs who are rural are going to get an access which nobody has done in India. This is a model that, and this is Google's pet project. This is our pet project. So it's the right kind of partnership, right? And
Right.
it also is very close to the mission we are at, right?
Right.
So it's not easy to get here, but the truth is, as a company we've always sort of again put our why first. So even, I mean, I think we're one of the few sales team that questions its why, and of course sometimes we may look a little impractical, but I believe it's going to solve, say, it's going to help us in the long term, and it already is sort of paying off. The other thing is, again, same for investors. I think some really really awesome investors on our cap table.
Right.
I'm proud of our cap table, right from Deep Kalra to Vijay Shekhar to Benny Bansal to Pankaj from Zomato, Sahil from Delivery, Indus Ketan, and I think some really cool founders. So one, taking founders' money was great strategy because
Right.
founders understand founders, and their money is actually the best quality of money. So in fact, I want to see more of this happen. Founders funding more founders in India because it will change the quality of our ecosystem. And second is, of course, even our institutions. Our institutions are also mission aligned, people who understand what we're building. And I think that really was an important decision because we could stay put and build out. We
Right.
could stay true to our why. And I think it's important for all stakeholders to understand what is the deal with the company. And I do believe companies like WeWork wouldn't have blown off or exploded if they stuck to the mission a little more sort of core sense of. So these are also mission centric companies, but
Right.
when large amounts of money comes into the picture, then there's no time to go slow or go wide, right? So I think it's also a matter of timing. And not to say that growth is wrong, but I just want to say that uh, you know uh, alignment of incentives and alignment of mission is very important. you
Right.
know and I think there are founders who have done this. Like I think Bhavish has done this really well.
Right.
Obviously Elon Musk has done it really well, right? His mission comes first, come whatever may. And I think mission centricity needs to be followed by investors as well.
Right.
And a lot of companies are forced to abort their missions, go for forced exits or sellouts by investors because the investors are not mission aligned. And I think it's
Right.
really really important to look at that.
Got it. Got it. I love the fact that you're mentioning some really core words in terms of the why, the mission, the long-term view, because I feel that large part of what you mentioned is also like, if you want success too fast, too soon, like that's not the playbook, I'm guessing. If you're not in it for, the long run to build an institution that lasts a couple of decades, then I'm guessing that's not the right point of view. So lovely to hear that line of thought. And one last question on Sheroes, and then we can move on to the concludatory portions about you as a founder. But another thing, and I'm not going to be repetitive about community building because you've spoken a lot about it. But one of the major aspects that I found about your community is the mentorship aspect, the the feeling of trust within the community itself, and being there for each other. And from what I could gather from your career as well, and you've been really kind to me as well, but you've been there for people, to just help them out. And similarly, you've had people in that space. So when I'm questioning, what I'm eyeing at is the mentorship array. How important is it to actually have, if not like-minded people, to surround yourself with the right kind of people, to have that kind of go-to person who can, help you out? And how is Shiro's building for that? And how important is it as a principal, A, as a founder, and B, as somebody, trying to get into the workspace or in the ecosystem?
Right. So I think a lot of this is like in any good system, in your life, in your body, in the world, energy and movement is important, right?
Right.
So what is mentorship is just a flow of energy from one person to another, and sometimes it's like uh, if it doesn't flow freely enough, then it's going to just saturate and die, right? And I
Right.
think so mentorship is not one way. I think even when you are a mentor, you grow in the process, right? And then we see it at the Shiro's community as well. uh, it's basically, I think it's a cultural thing, and you, if you build it, then it works beautifully, it works magically. And I think it's also tied to the fact that things like knowledge and money can't be kept in one place. You can't tie them up in a locker and let them there. They're of no use to anyone. Similarly, I think the same thing applies when it comes to a community. A community is actually, if you want to measure the success of a community, the number of net givers need to be higher than net takers,
Right.
right? And I think Shiro's has kind of managed to build a ecosystem where there are net givers who are way higher than net takers. And what it means is that the core value created for everyone is way high, right? So everyone takes away value from that community over a period of time. And as founders, right, like I wouldn't be here if people hadn't helped me out, right? And if I don't do it now, then what's the whole point, right? You have to keep the circle going. It's basically free movement of energy, right? Money is energy, time is energy, your knowledge is energy, your experience is energy, and you've got to keep it rotating, right? Otherwise, it'll stagnate. It'll create a cesspool that we don't want.
Right.
Uh, and I believe great ecosystems do it. I mean, why is Silicon Valley so great? Because
Right.
founders have mentors, right? And mentors, people people who arrive sort of send the elevator down, right? So it's everyone's job to send the elevator down, but also to create institutional triggers of mentorship. It's not just you and how great you are and like what how much halo you have. I think it's creating institutional triggers for mentorship, right? And I think those are important. At Shiro's, we really care about them. We've in fact, we are able to work on these projects. Like at this point, we run three accelerators. One, we run the Women in Cloud Accelerator in India, which is a Microsoft partnership. We run the Google Accelerator, and we're able to do it because we have the ecosystem. We don't have to create it, we don't have to seed it. It's seeded, it's baked, it's done. We can harvest it, we can plow back into it anytime. And I think that's what great communities did. Silicon Valley did exactly that. It
Right.
baked its community in a way where giving and taking was commonplace, it's the norm, right? Anybody who got there was, people are open to giving you time, people are open to having a chat with you, connecting you, making introductions, even they are not your investments, right? And that's
Right.
what makes a great ecosystem, right? So that you do things because there's nothing in it for you, and that's what makes a great ecosystem. You do things because you're just creating a culture of pay it forward, right? Net givers need to be way bigger than net takers, right? And that's what it is really. And I think if India wants to also be in a place where all the big things we talk about, the $5 trillion economy, the startup ecosystem, the product ecosystem, then net givers need to be the norm, right?
Right, right. Great cue again there. And for everybody who's listening, if you can inculcate this culture and, seed it in, as you said, and the benefits will reap with time for sure. And, if you pay it forward, it'll eventually come back and that cycle keeps moving forward, I guess. So
And
wonderful
it's
cue
fine if
out.
it doesn't come, right? It's fine if it
Yeah.
doesn't
So,
come
yeah, you don't have to
because
do it with that expectation anyway.
exactly,
Right, right. Exactly. Well mentioned. And thank you for that line of thought. I'll take a couple of last 5-10 minutes to close down the episode. But we've spoken a lot about what you're doing, what Sheroes is doing, the problem we're addressing. But moving a bit to you and, how you are as a founder, because I'm sure there's, a spirit to it. There can be a lot of components to it. But it'll be a great cue to probably, for youngsters to hear from you as to how your journey has evolved, and especially as a founder. And what are some of the things that go on at your workplace? What are some of your things on a daily schedule, and what is it that you do as a founder?
Right. So I think as a founder, I like to keep things simple. Like, I like the fact that I have one mission. I like the fact that, most of my life is unidirectional. So I like the binary. I like the unidirectional living. I like that, everything I do is kind of invested in the same mission.
Right.
Everything ties into each other. In Hindi, there's a line, "Sab taar jude hue hain," right? So it's, for
Right.
me, it is really connected. So I think, and that's how I think I live my life as well. It's not, it's not conflicting in any way. And the other thing is, I've been part of the ecosystem, so I'm personally at a place where I do want to sort of uh, think of things that are besides me, and think of things that are, even besides me, for Shiro's, and sort of start working on them. And of course, I think it is important to sort of also, I think, as Shiro's has grown and I have grown, I think one thing that's really worked for me is more space for self-reflection and self-awareness. I think as a founder, your real core asset is just your ability to be, self-aware and self-reflect, because uh, really, I think everything else is just somebody else's experience, and it may or may not work for you. So the only way you will arrive at your own conclusions is, by creating your own sense of practice, whatever that practice is, and whatever gets you there. uh, yeah, and I think, again, there are really no playbooks here. There are a lot of, like, there's a lot of information, but your playbook is your playbook, right? Your
Right.
life is your life,
True.
and what you want out of it is your deal, right? So we're all sort of optimizing for a different goal, right? So I think, uh, and that should sort of be your cue to say, what are you optimizing for, what do you really care for, and so yeah. And I think a lot of my learning has come from that, and yeah, I guess, ultimately it's your life, right? Like, you decide how you want to live it.
True, true. That is true. But great to see how it's panned out. And, before we close down, I'd like to call this episode Starting Up with Purpose, because apart from the entrepreneurial journey, the core purpose here is very strong. But moving from there itself, what would be some of your cues to young aspiring founders who can make their, starting up journey more purpose oriented, more long term oriented, and, just in the general sense of it, combine a sense of a higher purpose with their goal in turn, and then actually build towards it? If you have any comments.
Right. So I do think that, I think we all will have our own journeys. So it's
True.
not necessary every journey will be tied to a purpose, or at least it'll be very tangibly and clearly be tied to a purpose. I think we have to be true to who we are. So people will have different filters, right? Some people will have a sports filter, and some people will have a environment filter, and some people will
True.
just have to say, hey, I just want to build a playbook business that VCs like, and I will get to an exit faster, which is fine. I think we all just need to be aware of that, and we all need to be true to who we are and what we really enjoy. Some people love retail, and I can't, get to the hour of retail, right? So we have to tap into our inherent, our inherent whys and our inherent hows. There's really no playbook. I mean, everything and every company need not be a purpose company. I mean, I think
True.
it's great if you are, and it's great if you're building for long term, but we need all sorts. We need all sorts in the market. We need all sorts in the ecosystem. We need quick exits. We need a white hat junior as much as we need, an Uber or an Ola, or the next person. So I think we need all sorts. My only sort of advice is to be stay true to who you are, and do things because you get the why, and not because somebody said so.
Right. Got it. Got it. These are absolutely great learnings. And although we mentioned a lot of it in part, and you mentioned some great pointers, for the last question, if you have any other, final, like, so not essentially, let's say, company building advice, but you've had a great career over the years, so many varied experiences, purpose led growth, and all of the things that we can mention. So if you had any qualitative learnings, if you could leave, like, without getting too preachy, but this is one thing that I love to leave the audience with at the end of the episode. Would love to hear from your experience if you have any final thoughts or final learnings that you'd like to pass on to the younger generation that will build the Indian Valley forward.
Right. So, look, I think there's a lot of merit in just showing up, right? And there's a lot of like, it doesn't matter, what costume you are wearing or what hat you are donning today. If you're just around, I think there's a lot of merit in that, and you can create a lot of value not only for yourself but also for others. Uh,
Yeah,
and I guess, to be honest, I think success really looks like success from far, but at the end of it, it's pretty messy, so it might sound very nice in this episode that I have it all together, but the truth is none of us do. And I think
right.
we all need to be aware of that it's, and so at some level we are all winging it, right? Some of us are winging it by the day and for by the week, or over some experiments. uh, so it's all good. I think if you feel good about doing something, or if you're invested in it, then you should do it. If it doesn't work for you, feel free to dump it, like move on. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Right. So showing up and being cognizant of what you want, and being okay with the fact that it's not going to be all like a fairy tale, but it's going to, like, it'll work out, I guess. Eventually, I must mention that, Sairee, this has been such an honor for me. Thank you so much for a beautiful episode. This conversation has been amazing to hear. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope you had a good time as well.
I did. Thank you so much for having me here.
Pleasure's all mine.